I got it today, so, right? Everybody heard that. Unfortunately, I scared the death out of our guest speaker. No longer able to smile. We'll have to make you smile. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Club President Charles McClymans, and it's great to see so many people out on a beautiful summer day. It's great to have you all here today. Today's meeting is sponsored by Bridget Frazier and the Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestra. Bridget has been executive director of the Wisconsin Youth Symphony Orchestras since 2010, and she joined our Rotary Club in 2014. WISO has more than 5,000 young musicians from communities throughout southern Wisconsin that have participated in WISO during its 50-plus years of existence. And they will soon have a new WISO Center of Music on East Washington Avenue, which will be a new chapter for music education in our area. The construction of this new building, it's beautiful. The construction will be targeted completion in December. And Bruce told me that you're already starting to give some tours, so that's great. Our thanks to Bridget and WISO for sponsoring this meeting. Please remain standing for our opening patriotic song. Robert Reed will lead us in singing our national anthem, and Jeff Bartell on the keyboard. And then Robert will lead us in When You're Smiling.
I'm waiting for that.
Oh, say, can you see by the sun's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, their bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the fight that our flag was still there. Oh, say thus the star-spangled banner yet wave. Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Yes, I know everyone wants to say play ball. But in honor of our speaker and our presentation today, we're going to sing When You're Smiling. Please join us. When you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. When you're laughing, the sun comes shining through. But when you're crying, you bring on the rain. So stop that crying and be happy again. So when you're smiling, 'cause when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you.
Thank you, Robert and Jeff. I see a lot of smiles out there. Our guest introductions today will be done by Rhonda Adams. Rhonda?
And yes, I'm smiling extra big because we have a lot of guests here today. So as I announce your name, please stand up and remain standing, and then we'll give a big round of applause to all of you at the end. Jasmine Appleton, guest of Sabrina Madison. Diane Ballwig, guest of Bridget Frazier. Susan Gardles, Bridget Frazier's guest. Mary Gerbig, and Bruce Matthews, all guests of Bridget. George Beesman and Scott Beesman, guests of Donna, as well as Daniel, Joan, and Zachary Geller, Donna's guests as well. I think somebody's been visiting over there at the Beastman House. Scott Helmerson's guest is Lisa Dugdale. Rob Ringeisen's guest is Laura Fitzgerald. Cheryl Cato has two guests, Sarah Flynn and Celia Huerta. Ted Deedy has Pamela Hinchman as his guest. Jeanette Jordy is guest of Maria Alvarez Stroud. Our president's guest is Chris Pagero. Ashley Quinto Powell's guest is Creighton Quinto. And then the investment committee has two guests, Jordan Geiger and Mark Van Summerson. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Thanks, Rhonda, and welcome to all of our guests. We are doing each week a moment of Rotary gratitude, and today Maggie Porter-Kratz is going to share with us her gratitude. Maggie joined our club in 2020, and she is Vice President of Philanthropy for Madison College Foundation. She's the past chair of our Community Projects Committee, and she just started a 2-year term on our Rotary Club Board of Directors. Maggie, come on up.
Charles gave me a timer. It must be known for talking. Well, I'm excited to be here. As Charles said, my name is Maggie Porter-Kratz, and I've spent my career dedicated to philanthropy and have loved the service components of Rotary and the opportunities I've had to lead and get involved. It's so nice to be part of a group that sees the world and wants to be involved. But today I wanted to talk instead about how Rotary really brings an introduction of ideas and topics, things maybe we wouldn't have in our everyday. If you were here on August 11th, 2021, I know you'll remember Marissa Mosley. She was the incoming coach of the UW women's basketball team. She was so funny and magnetic and motivated, and she was about the same age as me, which really made me connect with her. She talked about creating a healthy environment of competition that pushed everyone to be their best version of themselves. And I'll never forget her ribbing Rotarians during the question and answers. After her talk, I bought a family season tickets to women's basketball game. And I grew up in a family that was deeply rooted in the military, so I didn't have a lot of geographic roots. So it was new for me to be so invested in a sports team, and continues to be. And it's really been fun to attend the games, particularly with my daughter, who is now 7. She has a strong chance of growing up to be a tall woman, maybe a good basketball player, we'll see. And it's been really fun to have her get to know the team a little bit as well. I still don't know much about basketball, but even I can tell the team is getting better. And every time the team wins, Coach Mosley grabs the mic, thanks the team, and thanks the fans. You're welcome. And then she takes the time to high-five every little kid who sticks their arm through, including mine, and I just appreciate that. And season tickets just became available for this upcoming year. They're still only $99 for a pack of 4. So I just wanted to thank the program committee for bringing, so many different vast ideas and opening up the world and showing us what's going on in our community. And Paula, I'm looking forward to what you have to say. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Maggie. And today we have 4 new members to introduce. So they're all sitting up here at the table. And new members, it's an honor to have you as members of our club. You're being inducted, and I like to tell people that your Rotary pin is the only thing that you need to gain access to 37,000 clubs worldwide. That's better than American Express Platinum. So on with our new member introductions. Our first is Sagar Awate. Would you please stand with your sponsor, Teresa Holmes? Paul Ryman is also Sagar's sponsor. Sagar has been loaned the classification of consulting and is owner of Sandhi Systems, which provides project management services and training and coaching for various industries. He was born in Pune, India. Sagar and his wife, Vrashali, make their home on Quarry Hill Drive in Fitchburg with their teenage daughter, Trisha. He attended the University of Pune, India, where he earned his bachelor's degree in engineering. He also holds a master's degree from The Ohio State University. Sagar is an adjunct instructor at UW-Madison. He enjoys hiking, gardening, and motorcycle riding. Please remain standing. Would Adam Heffron please stand with his sponsor, Wes Sparkman? Adam has been loaned the classification of Business and Convention Development and is Executive Director for the Alliant Energy Center. He was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and came to Madison a year ago with his wife, Colleen. They make their home on North Prospect Avenue in Madison and have one grown daughter. Adam holds a bachelor's degree in hospitality management from Georgia State University. He is a recipient of the Certified Fair Executive designation from the International Association of Fairs and Expositions. Adam serves on the Destination District Madison Committee and is a board member of the Monona Terrace Community and Event Center. He is also a member of the International Association of Venue Managers. He enjoys hiking, biking, travel, and home renovation. Our next new member is April Kagia. Please stand with her sponsor, Jason Ilstrup. April has been loaned the classification of Education and is CFO for Wingra School. She was born in Long Beach, California. April lives in North Westfield Road and has 4 children. She holds a bachelor's degree in legal studies from UW-Madison and is currently working on an MBA degree at UW-Madison. She is also a graduate of the Wisconsin Local Government Leadership Academy, and April was named one of Wisconsin's most influential Black leaders in 2020. She serves on the Overture Center's Community Advisory Board and on the Student Education Committee of the International Organization of Black Security Executives. April says, "I love to cook and entertain. I also love to golf, although I'm not very good at it." Please stay standing, and would Sabrina Madison please stand with her sponsor, Anthony Gray. Sabrina has been loaned the classification of Associations, Business and Professional, and is founder and CEO of the Progress Center for Black Women. She was born in Chicago, Illinois, and makes her home on American Parkway in Madison. Sabrina has one adult child, and she attended Madison College and UW-Milwaukee. She formerly served as the chair of the Economic Development Committee, but is now an alder appointed to EDC. No longer the chair, she also continues to serve on the Guaranteed Income Pilot Advisory Task Force for the City of Madison. Both committee roles speak to her commitment to social and economic development. Sabrina was listed among the 100 Woke Women in 2018 by Essence Magazine, the only woman in Wisconsin to make that list, and she received the Brian Howell Excellence Innovation Award in 2019 for Best of Madison Business. Sabrina enjoys traveling, reading, and volunteering. Would you please join me in welcoming these fine new members? I am glad to see that our president-elect and president-elect nominee both have new members, and I'd like to call President-elect Jason Ilstrup up here. Jason, could you tell us a little bit, how easy was it actually to bring in a new member?
Well, now that I have the mic, it was phenomenally easy. And look at these 4 amazing new members we have. We have multiple elected officials. We have somebody whose son plays for Forward Madison. We have somebody whose father was the head of the Minnesota State Fair for years. These are people that we can all get to know, and they are leaders in our community. They make our club better. But you know what makes it even better than that? Even more new members. And I cannot wait to see the next class. Please nominate good people that you know in your networks to come join us here at Madison Rotary Club.
Look at that. You're a pro. Thank you, President-elect Jason. Announcements. Reminder that our 6th annual Bring a Child to Rotary Day is set for Wednesday, August 23rd. Our program committee has arranged for Yo-Yo Champion to be our speaker, and so it should really be interesting for kids and adults. The cost is $10 for guests up to age 18 or 20 if you want to bring an adult child. You're also welcome to do that. There are orange sheets available at the back table. You can pick one up on your way out of the meeting today. Okay, we have birthdays to celebrate. With a bit of humor, wisdom that complements Rotary's mission, we also encourage members to make a gift to our Synergy Scholarship Fund in honor of their birthday. And starting, we have July 30th, Sergeant at Arms Dewey Bradison. July 30th, Kaleem Kerr. July 31st, Joy Carden. August 1st, Daryl Benke. August 1st, Stan Inhorn. August 1st, Letitia Nelson. August 2nd, Mike Casey. Mike shares this quote: "The person who does not read has no advantage over the person who cannot read," and that's from Mark Twain. August 3rd, Terry Murawski. August 4th, Mallory Hepner. August 4th, Mike Swanson. Thanks to the celebrants for the contribution to the Madison Rotary Foundation. Now please join me in singing Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you. As always, we have members in the news. Julie Bennett was quoted in an article about Alicia Santiago Bardin becoming the first ever Senior Director of Human Resources at St. Vincent de Paul in Madison. Bill Connors and Jason Ilstrup were quoted in an article about changes in planned land use for Madison housing and office space on Regent Street. Baltazar de Anda Santana was featured in an In Business magazine article about his role at the Latino Academy of Workforce Development, the education programs they offer, and how they're working to establish partnerships within the community. Paul Fenlon was quoted in an article about this year's Cap Times Idea Fest, which will feature Judy Woodruff, Al Hunt, David Marinas at the Idea Fest September 21st evening event. Jason Fields was quoted in an article in this month's In Business magazine about a new initiative by Mad Rep to close the economic gaps and drive innovation for rural and urban communities. And our very own Pat Jenkins was featured in this month's In Business magazine's Professional of the Month column. Yep. And Pat, would you please send that out to the club, include that in the weekly news so that everyone can read it? Thank you. Okay. Today's program, I know that's why you're all here, you're all smiling today. Our speaker is Dr. Paula Niedenthal. She received her PhD from the University of Michigan and is currently the Howard Leventhal Professor of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She was previously on the faculty of the Departments of Psychology at Johns Hopkins University and Indiana University, and was also a member of the National Center for Scientific Research in France for more than a decade. Dr. Niedenthal's area of research include representational models of emotion, the social functions of emotion expression, socioecological shapers of emotion culture, and the physiological basis of social tolerance. In her free time, Dr. Niedenthal enjoys all winter and summer sports and travel. She also has many pets, including the now famous Rudy the miniature pig, whom you may have read about. I did ask Dr. Niedenthal, would she please tell us why Rudy the pig makes you and a lot of other people smile, right? We'd like to hear that. I want to mention that we'll also have Q&A. If there's time remaining, please wait for the microphone to come to you and follow the four-way test for Q&A. Please welcome Dr. Paula Niedenthal to our podium.
Wow, I feel responsible for a lot of stories and a lot of comments and a lot of data right now. I want to first thank the piano player. I think his name was Jeff, because I Left My Heart in San Francisco is my dad's favorite song. And were he here, he would be making my mother dance, even though there's no dance floor. So lots of shame and embarrassment by the children my whole life. But only good feelings when you played it, and a lot of smiles. I looked extremely carefully in the internet and did not find an ordinance that prohibited miniature pigs in Madison. So I am maybe a bad internet searcher, but I am not irresponsible. I did look, and so did a friend of mine who works for the DNR, and so did 2 other adults. So we somehow were not able to find that. Rudy is back, and the alders are planning to amend the ordinance because it was designed for a very good purpose. The very good purpose is hogs are about 400 to 700 pounds. Some of you know that, and some of you don't. They are not bred to be companion animals, and they can be really, really dangerous. Miniature pigs are raised to be companion animals, and I'll stop there. Why does I have no idea what's going on here, but over the last year and almost a half, there have been literally thousands of people coming to see him every day, and I think that several times a day and many, many times a week, people say, this is the only time I've smiled in several months, or I have no reason to smile if I don't visit Rudy, or I have to come every day because I know I'll be happy when I see him. And after a while, I think my husband, who you met a couple of weeks ago, and I felt almost responsible for the mental health of the whole West Side. And that was why having somebody call and not just inform me was so devastating. It really took a toll on a lot of people, including myself, because you don't just hand somebody a miniature pig and say, take care of them while I work this out. So that's the story. Why I think he's unusual, he's funny, and people often have not seen pigs before. They don't even know what size a miniature pig should be. Many people think it should be the size of a small cat. And that's why they shouldn't buy one, because it won't be. A miniature pig is just miniature with regard to the hog, not in miniature like it fits in a Barbie house. So I think that's a really important lesson that we've now all learned through this commotion that's happened. Okay, so that's the update on Rudy. So the title of my talk refers to a larger problem that I study, within which I learn a lot about smiling. So I will get to smiling, but I want to talk about a sort of a larger issue which has to do with culture and facial expression, and smiles will come up quite often. One of the things that you might have noticed if you read are exposed to any international news over the last bunch of years, you'll see that Japanese business people are taught to smile for successful interaction in international business. During the World Cup soccer in Russia, there had to be smile training programs because there were complexities in people understanding smiles by people who are not Russian coming into the country. Paris in about 2010 had a smile campaign so that people in service roles would learn to smile so that people coming to visit Paris wouldn't find them disagreeable and surly. So there have been many, 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 many millions of dollars in different currencies spent on smiling over the last 15 years. And so what I often say to my undergraduates in a course on emotion is facial expression of emotion and emotion in general are incredibly important, not because you're going to become me, because you might be in business, health, or education, where all of those things are so, so important. In fact, social psychology is on the MCAT now, so you can't, if you're going to be a doctor, you don't get away from psychology anyway. And so, I do think that people who are in the area of any kind of commerce and business gain a lot from learning a lot about emotion. I'm going to end with one comment from a friend of mine who was in management for Michelin tires. When I lived in France, I lived in the heart of Michelin tires in the United States at Greenville, South Carolina. And I gave a week-long course in English, which was unusual, at a French business school. And he came in and said, everything that Paula just said is important. In my job as a manager for Michelin tires, 75% of my job is about managing other people's emotions and their motivation. That's what I do. Because all the students were like, whatever, whatever. Oh, wow, Preston Gray is here from Michelin tires. And then he said, Niedenthal's stuff is actually really important to you. So that was great. So that I'm just sort of motivating this also for an academic kind of application. I was going to tell you about my career, but people already told you about my career. Thank you for the introduction. I also want to note that I'm alum of UW, even though I was hired in 2011. My son is alum of UW. My mother got her degree in art education in 1951, and my grandmother got her teaching degree from Whitewater State Teaching College in 1911. And so I believe in public education and higher education in Wisconsin because I think that that's the history of our state as represented by my own family. So what I want to talk about today is first by acknowledging my own lab. These are my undergraduates and my graduate students. The undergraduates are in the middle, and the graduate students and postdocs are around me, and I want to acknowledge all of their roles in hard work and the research I'm going to report today. So my lab, the Niedenthal Emotions Lab, is preoccupied with a number of things that were also mentioned in the introduction. But one of our sort of broader questions has to do with what explains differences in the expression, experience, and regulation of emotion across cultures. So some of you, and subcultures, and some of you have traveled or traveled to different parts of the country, the United States, that has been settled by people from different other places. And you might have noticed that while there's great commonality, there's also great difference, often in frequency and sometimes in meaning. And maybe you've even had problems interacting with other people from other places, other cultures, other countries, because you don't understand their emotions. I think we very often think we get their emotions and we don't understand the language, and yet there are issues of frequency and recognition of other people's emotions. So my lab is pretty interested in that. And the theory that I'm going to be presenting today was inspired when I lived in France, and I have 4 boys, and none of them wanted me to read them the Little House on the Prairie books. And not that boys don't like to hear it, but my boys did not want to hear it. And they did like to hear Marcus reading stuff in German, so that was good. But what I was sort of reminded of when I reread them by myself in France, among many other realizations that I had, but one of the realizations was, unlike the country I was living in at that time, France, in the United States, over the history of our country, people from different ethnic backgrounds, national backgrounds, racial backgrounds, have had to live and interact with each other all the time for hundreds of years. And that is not what was happening around me in France. I was largely living, I wasn't in Paris, and I was largely around people who were French and whose all of their ancestors were French. And when I was thinking about Little House on the Prairie incidences, what you see is that people who are from all sorts of linguistic and social backgrounds are all ending up at the weed elevator or combining together or whatever they're doing. And when you're not living in that kind of environment, you're living out of it like I was, and you're looking at that, you're like, okay, that is a huge evolutionary, social, and linguistic challenge that we sometimes really don't think about, because I would claim that we don't think very much historically, as much as we should, about why things are the way they are. And so one of the things that occurred to me, given that I'm interested in differences in emotion, regulation, experience, and expression, was that the difference in a place like the United States versus a place like France or Norway, where there's not a long history of people coming into the country to create a very ethnically diverse population, the difference is you just don't share a lot. Like you have to learn together for the first time over the course of history when people are migrating and refugees and either forced or chosen migration and immigration. So I thought, I'll tell you in a minute why I thought that was important, but the first thing I needed to do was figure out as a scientist how you ever measure that. How do you know the long history, ethnic diversity of a country versus another country? So I was paring my hair out, which is okay, because I have a lot, I can lose a little bit, and I called historians and demographers and all these people, and they would be like, you want to know the degree to which a country developed from many countries of the world versus one? Like, that's not what we do. We don't have that thing. So finally, economists did it. Economists at Brown actually measured the extent to which every country of the world over 500 years developed from every other country of the world, which is great. They're behavioral economists, and they also went to the University of Michigan. I think we were all preoccupied with the same things and the same influences, so that's cool. So I'm going to call that idea ancestral diversity. A more complex or longer term for it is on the slide, heterogeneity of long history migration. But that's just too much to say, so I'm going to say ancestral diversity. So why is it important? And this is why I think it's important. It seemed to me that if people composed societies, if societies were composed with populations and people who came from many, many other places, compared to not many other places. So they had high ancestral diversity. They would have a lot of pressure to communicate with their face, to communicate basically non-verbally, and to establish new norms for things like emotional expressiveness in those interactions in a way that you would never have to do it in a country where you share the same language for emotion. So you just have to say, I'm mad. You don't have to do too much, right? Et cetera. So if you have learned a new language in the course of your life, you do know probably that one of the most difficult things is learning language for emotion. Marcus is German. This is my husband who spoke a couple of weeks ago. And one of the mistakes that he makes, besides translating from French to English, but he goes from French to English in the wrong register. So he might say something like, I'm fed up with that, when it was like a tiny thing. We would not say fed up. That's too much. And so that just shows you how hard it is to learn language for emotion. It's like, what violation of anything deserves fed up versus irritated versus bothered, right? Hard. It's pretty hard. So what if we were a Swedish and a Polish person in Minnesota going to the wheat, what am I thinking of, the grain elevator, and we want somebody to help us unload it? Like, how do we negotiate that? How do we tell somebody, thank you for that, or that is what I wanted in the first place, when we don't share norms for emotion, which vary widely across the world, or language for emotion, which is very complex? What I argue is that 500 years of having to do those negotiations yields very different types of expression of emotion, in particular, an amplification of emotion. And also a clarity of emotion, that I know what your face means because you've had to communicate with lots of different people, so that signal on my face better be right. I have lots more to say about that in another talk. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we measure ancestral diversity. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what countries think about how much you're supposed to express emotion. Those are called display rules. Those are like agreement about what do we do. Cross-cultural expression recognition accuracy. I'm going to tell you about how easy it is for everybody else in the world to recognize your expressions versus somebody's expressions from a country very low in ancestral diversity, for example. I'll tell you then kind of a lot about smiles, and then I will end with an extension of the analysis of the whole world to the United States. And this is actually going to go much faster. If your eyes are spinning, this is not hard. Okay, so how do you measure ancestral diversity? Or how do you represent it? This is a map that you can look on the slides. This map represents the extent to which every other country of the world contributed to each of the country of the world's population since the Portuguese started making maps and since the world started being colonized. So people were moving around. That's about 500 years. So over the course of 500 years, many, many countries contributed to the present-day population of North and South American countries, Australia, Israel. There are a lot of places. And then there are a lot of places, many of the Scandinavian countries, many of the East Asian countries, where the populations have remained relatively stable, where the population derives from the same population of centuries ago. Okay? So you can see what the more ancestrally diverse and less ancestrally diverse countries that are there. You can also see that the ancestrally diverse countries are not only English language countries, which is important. So the first study we did after we had this idea that people from high ancestrally diverse countries should use a lot of nonverbal stuff, we did it by contacting a colleague of mine in San Francisco who had already collected data from 31 countries of the world about what they think you should do on your face when you have an emotion. So that's, again, display rules. And what David Matsumoto did was to collect display rules from at least 100 people in 31 countries, more than that. I'm not even going to do the division right now. Many, many people, so over 5,000 people contributed to that particular study. And what we got from his study was the extent to which you show a smile or an anger or you hide it. That's also another option, right? And of course, our prediction was the more your country is high in ancestral diversity, the more you're going to say, when you have an emotion, you put it on your face so we can all see it. And then complementary, the less ancestrally diverse, the more you might actually even dissimulate or not show your emotion. So this, you don't need to look at this graph at all, but what we found was after using many, many predictors of display rules, the greatest percentage of variance, the best predictor, is ancestral diversity. So of the variance explained, 18% of it was due to whether you came from a country high versus low in ancestral diversity. And that's controlling for a whole bunch of other possible factors. So that was our first idea that, yeah, if your country has this set of norms and came from this amount of diversity, you feel like you need to use your face to show your emotions. And if not, no, not so much. That was our first indicator. So one of my graduate students said, well, also when they show that expression, everybody has to be able to understand it, right? And I was like, yes. So her prediction was people who live in ancestrally diverse countries like the United States also make expressions that everybody around the world will be pretty accurate at reading. And then again, complementary, if you were from a low ancestrally diverse country, there might be more we might say, expression dialects, and there might be difficulties decoding their expression. So the way we did that, that's a hard proposal to test when you're thinking about the whole world. But what's really great is there are lots and lots of studies of accuracy in reading other people's emotions. So here's my mom with a Japanese friend. This Japanese friend was smiling just like my mom until I said, smile like somebody from Japan, and she completely changed. This is it. So she canted her head, among other things. My graduate student found 92 studies in which she got data on how clearly or how easily people from a bunch of other countries or one other country could read the expression of somebody from another country. And so we could find out what's the relationship between the country of origin of the person making the expression and the ability of everybody else to recognize that expression accurately. That's what we could find out from the study. Thank you, Adrian. So what we found was this, that the more we were controlling for important other variables, if you're a statistician, I know there's at least one economist here, controlling for a lot of other variables, we find that ancestral diversity of the person making the expression is a strong predictor of how accurate everybody else is at reading that expression. So that means as people from North America, for example, our expressions might be easier to read when we go traveling than somebody from a country low in ancestral diversity. That's an implication. Okay, so I talked generally about expressions, but you're interested in smiles, and actually so is my lab. That's what we study. And I could give another whole long talk just on the human and non-human smile, but I'm not going to do that. I will tell you about the relationship between ancestral diversity and smiling, because you might have already heard all the stereotypes about smiling. There's a lot of them. I had to live with a lot of all Americans smile too much and it's fake and they don't mean it. You know, when I was living in Europe, there's a strong belief of American smiles being fake. But when I was collecting data in Indonesia, I said to the colleague on Java, should we also collect data on Bali? Because I heard that people smile a lot on Bali. And he said, that's all false smiling. And I was like, oh my God, just like the accusation. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, oh, they're just trying to get people to come to Bali. The argument about Americans is the same. They're trying to sell things, and this is a capitalistic thing, the development of smiles. So I was like, no, I don't think so. I think that's a little superficial and a little decontextualized and a little not historically accurate. So let's go. So the thing is that there's not only one kind of smile. My lab has revealed really good evidence for at least 3 kinds of smiles that solve 3 tasks that human beings engage in groups all the time. One is rewarding other people. But that's what we thought smiles were anyway, right? You smile at somebody to say, I'd like you to do that again, and then they nod. Or you smile at them because they took their finger out of the light socket and you didn't want them to have it in there as your child. You're rewarding behavior by smiling. But we also have another smile that's extremely frequent, which my lab calls the smile of affiliation. that is usually a closed mouth smile, and it indicates not that I'm happy or you should do it again, that I'm safe. It's a non-threat signal. It should be done very often in places like this where we're all different from each other initially, right? So smiles of affiliation are very important. And then if you've played a lot of competitive sports or you've been in international relations, smiles of dominance are smiles that we sometimes use the word smirking. It's a lopsided smile that signals that you are not as good as I am on this one thing here. It's a really safe way to negotiate your position, and it's also a very common smile. Now, what's interesting about that is only one of them comes from positive emotion, the reward smile. The other ones are not about signaling emotion, but they are regulating your social environment. They're relatively frequent, and they're very important. And like I said, I could give a whole nother talk on it. The smile of reward and affiliation should be really important in countries where you don't have prior relationships with everybody and you're starting to meet somebody new. Like in countries that are where the populations are stable over centuries, moving in and out of groups doesn't happen that much. You're part of pretty stable groups. You don't have to show that you're not scary. You have other ways to show that. And you have other ways to reward people without smiling. So, of course, in countries like the United States, North and South America, you really need to smile in lots of different situations and with reward smiles and affiliation smiles in particular to solve navigating your social world. Well, fortunately, an initial take on whether ancestral diversity is related to smiling, at least smile frequency. These two psychologists at Pitt and Carnegie Mellon University extracted smiles of over 850,000 people across the world looking at different kinds of advertisements that were not the exact same ones, that wouldn't be possible, but that were similar in interest and humor. And really the question was, so they designed a fancy algorithm to get the smiles. And then they asked, what's the best predictor of smile frequency across the globe? And the best predictor was ancestral diversity. Now, when you do that kind of analysis, you have to control for gross domestic product, because smiling is related to whether you are economically viable. We can't ask people right now in Ukraine or formerly in Rwanda to be smiling all the time, right? So you do have to make sure that you're controlling for other big economic or general factors that will affect smile frequency. Once you've done that, ancestral diversity is strongly related to smile frequency and in a way that's actually quite important. Statistically speaking, the country's highest in ancestral diversity smile twice as often as the people low in ancestral diversity. So that's an effect that you would notice. It's not a small thing. So that's really cool. So smiling is more frequent, but that's a kind of study that you can't draw really strong conclusions from. So we got our hands on the Gallup poll from the whole world. It was the global emotion poll, and so when I saw that come into my inbox, I was like, I need those data right now. And so we got them. What the Gallup World Poll measured was the extent to which people in 142 countries reported smiling and laughing the previous day. Also not perfect, but complements nicely the work from Pitt and Carnegie Mellon. So we could say, also controlling for gross national product, we could say, can we predict how much people said they're smiling and laughing across the world with various factors? And we could. Ancestral diversity is a strong, significant, and positive predictor of smiling. So the countries with most long history migration show the highest frequency of smiling in this graph. Other work that we did also look specifically at reward and affiliation smiles, and these are more important in these countries as well. We, as a people, have to show that we are not threatening, that we're inviting interaction, and we have to show that we liked what the other person did, because we initially and over our culture didn't have good ways of doing that. And so as a culture, we now use smiles to actually achieve certain tasks or outcomes in ways that you don't have to in other kinds of countries. So this is like my last finding, which is, guess what? The United States also vary in ancestral diversity. So you won't be surprised to find that the states of the United States that have the most historical ethnic diversity are ones that are connected to water. So New York State, the Great Lakes states, California. Looking at the census of the United States is difficult because of how people are defined, how people were associated with their countries of origin. But when you take care of all of that by acknowledging a poor precision in certain early censuses, you can still derive relative understanding of the extent to which each state of the United States is, in long history terms, ancestrally diverse. So there they are. And then you can say, how about those findings I just showed you? Do they also obtain when you just look at the US? Because if you're somebody like me, you want to see that again, and you want to see it in a different place in a different way. And what you find is that in the United States, the states with the highest ancestral diversity are also the people who smile and laugh the most. So let me just point out a little thing for, I think it was April who's from Long Beach. Here's something interesting. California and Wisconsin are both pretty high in ancestral diversity, and the amount of smiling and laughter in the two states is exactly the same. And so if you guys are thinking of moving for the weather, it actually turns out that my students have studied emotion and weather, and it turns out that there are almost no direct effects. It could be indirect through your passion for golf, but that's not a direct effect. That's your issue. There's almost no relationship except darkness, of course, makes us unhappy, but it's a very small effect because a lot of other things make you more unhappy and more happy than whether or not it's dark. And extreme heat is related to, besides death, violence, and aggression. That's it. There's almost no other effect. And these studies have been done even in Estonia, where they're looking for that effect because it's dark in Estonia. So I always find that interesting to look at our states and see where people are smiling and laughing. And it's not tracking at all with climate. It's tracking with something else. It's tracking with ancestral diversity, who you're around, and what you have to be doing. So I'm happy to take questions in a moment, but I just want to summarize that I'm really interested in long history migration and how people who come from many, many, many different backgrounds have to accommodate the tasks of social living that are much harder under those circumstances, and how it results in having different kinds of and different frequencies of emotional expression and even emotion regulation. And I think this is a relatively profound approach, and it also is relatively, it's a strong predictor, and it's very useful for things other than just looking at facial expression of emotion. There have been some pretty amazing studies looking at this factor in assimilation, in prejudice against outgroups and in-groups. And a final comment is that recent diversity, for example, my brother lives in Sweden, you could argue, oh my gosh, there's lots of migrants all of a sudden, but that is very different from a long history. Our long history has created a culture, and initial influx to a country like Sweden or somewhere else that has never experienced that before is much more complicated and does not lead to the same effects as a long history of living with people who do not share our language or our norms for emotion. So I want to thank my graduate students who helped me with this work and all the different places that they are now, and thank you for your attention.
Hi, thank you for coming to talk to us. It was a really interesting chat. My closest kind of engagement with affiliation smile has to do with interracial communication. Yep. When African Americans are in majority white spaces, there's kind of an unwritten rule that you smile without showing so much teeth that you look scary, and maybe even a head nod. You want to acknowledge their presence because there's so few of you. And if you don't do it, there can be like social approbation for folks who don't acknowledge other folks of color in a majority white setting. And that's where I see that kind of affiliation
So
style.
thank you so much for allowing me to tell you about our new data and research. So our approach to facial expression is that they're functioning to regulate your social environment, and it means that if the environment for one group of people might be different from an environment for another. And in particular, the research we're doing right now looks at African American smiles because we've always had a quite diverse data set of smiles. And at one point, we invited 10 white and 10 black professional actors from Wisconsin, mostly Milwaukee, but some from Madison, to the lab, and they made the facial expressions for us, and then we made movies, and we used these in our lab. But at one point, we were like, the black men in particular smiles are so exact, are so clear, they're better signals than everybody else. And so we thought, who has to smile so they're not threatening to white people? And so this makes complete sense that people who have to reassure or tell other people they're not threatening because at prior attitudes and stereotypes might make that the prediction, have to be extremely, remember how I talked about smiles can be clear to everybody or not clear to everybody. Our prediction, and we now have some data suggesting that black men's smiles in particular are particularly good signals. And there's going to be conditions that will even moderate that to make it higher, which you just said, which is if you live in a white space, then you're even going to be better at it. And so we actually have those data too about where people live and what spaces they're going in and out of. So thank you for making that very good prediction. Every time I tell somebody the prediction, they go, that has to be right. So now I will publish it.
Hi, I'm Lynn Roth, and I was curious, excuse me, do any of the apes or any other animals for that matter smile?
So yeah, in particular, Rudy, pigs not so much, I don't think, but I think some people read smiles into Rudy. The argument is that there are homologs that, yeah, so particularly apes and some monkeys have things that can be coded as smiles and are used in the same way. So there are smiles that look like, would look like smiles of reward and occur in those settings during play and grooming. And this has a different morphology, but there is a silent bear, I mean, you might know this, I don't know who you are. So there is another display that is used for submissiveness that is probably similar to our notion of a smile of affiliation. But there's also, cultural evolution, if not evolution. And so what we're finding really interesting is that in certain apes and monkeys, the silent bared tooth display shows a lot of teeth, but is affiliative or submissive. And in humans, over history, there's been an interesting attempt to cover or not show the teeth. Including in ancient China, they blackened their teeth. So we're wondering sometimes whether closing the mouth in affiliation smile is to remove ourselves from the relationship to teeth and possible aggression that associated with it. So there's some really interesting homologs, but they're not exactly the same.
Thank you, Paula, for the very interesting presentation. And I'm delighted that you enjoyed the Tony Bennett tribute song.
And also, it was so fitting.
Yes, yes. I've done my own study on smiles. We like to ride bicycles, and we ride on bike pads. And I found that as we pass somebody going the other way, if I give them a smile where they can see my teeth, and I don't know whether it's a reward smile or an affiliation, what kind of it, they typically smile back. And if I don't smile at all, they don't smile at me either. So is that a reward smile that I'm giving them? I give them a broad smile.
Yeah, we're what?
Just do your thing.
Here's something, it really, I don't know if we're distinguishing between fake and real here, but any kind of smile is better than not one, So, yeah, people mimic each other's smiles. Smiles invite smiles back, and the whole world smiles with you. There's an awful lot of lyrics that I can draw on in the book I'm writing. And so there's a contagion of smiles, and what you're describing is really, really typical.
Over here. Right here.
Hi, my name is Carol Trone. Thank you for your talk. This is fascinating. I am always interested in the studies on happiness in countries, and I know you're talking about smiles as communication. Do you reference those things? Because I don't think we want to say that the people low on the smile scale aren't happy, right? We know, in fact, I was trying to look at that, and in fact, there can be a real disconnect, as we know. Smiling people are not always happy people. So do you look at that intersection at all in your work?
Yes, and smiling people, for a variety of reasons, are often very happy because smiles feed back to our brain and make us happy. So I think, so I have a couple things to say about that, all very interesting. If you model the Gallup poll data that I showed you for the world and the United States, because they ask similar questions in the world and the United States. They also ask how positive they were feeling, a bunch of happiness kinds of items, and the effects are the same. So the more ancestrally diverse, the more ratings of positive emotions and positive experiences. So in those two in the Gallup data, they're tracking smiling and positivity. I would personally, having lived abroad for a long time, my brother lives in Sweden, and I read a lot about this now, I would personally be very careful about cross-cultural and cross-national reports of happiness. When people kept reporting that the Danes were super happy, the Danes were completely perplexed. In particular, a social scientist in Denmark said, they're not talking about happiness in the same way. The word happy, and nobody says Glücklichkeit or ich bin total glücklich in German. So the Germans now use the word happy because they're like, there's not really that concept. And in France, you don't report being happy either. And so the Danish social scientists' idea, which I think is probably true, is that in a lot of cases, people are really reporting on the extent to which their needs are met, often by society. And so what they're saying is they're confusing life satisfaction with what we're talking about as happiness, and those are actually separable. So I would say that we should ignore the cross-national reports of who's happy and who's not. In addition, they often don't control for gross domestic product. And so, so my data track, but I would also say be very careful about, don't because you read those studies, move, is what I'm saying. Just like, don't move because you think that 1 more minute of sunlight is going to make you happy. I mean, don't move for these reasons. There are so many books by my own colleagues and friends about how bad you are, and I am, and we all are, at predicting what brings happiness. You should believe them.
Thank you, Dr. Niedenthal. That's fascinating. So, and it really makes me smile to see such a full room of people. Doesn't it make you smile? Yeah? So keep coming back, folks. Thank you for coming today. Next week, we will hear about the new McKenzie Regional Workforce Center of the Boys and Girls Club. I attended the opening, and it's really amazing. So you'll hear all about that, the good work that they're going to be doing in our community. And as we close, please stand and we'll recite the 4-way test together of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a great week, everyone.